Ron Altman as our speaker, and he has a long history. He's been in the area for 20-some years, but has a long history. He's an architect, test engineer, computer programmer, teacher, and a hermit by disposition. That's his claim. He's written 7 books, and his talk today is kind of going to be focused on his most recent book called Nor, Hell of Fury. And it's always interesting. He'll tie the fiction part into fact. And, we think of this area as being mostly Norwegian and some Swedish and German heritage. The Alexanders were Scottish. So there's lots of heritage in the area, but going way back, Ron has a tie to the French connection. So that's what this talk is about today, and I'll let him introduce himself a little bit more. We will have time at the end for some questions, correct? So thank you again for coming, and we'll hear from Ron. It's probably good if you use it. Do you want this over?
No, that would be okay. Does this thing really work?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you're hearing me comfortably now? Or louder? So I should talk louder? Okay. Okay. And thank you for that kind introduction, Rita. As she said, the guy who lives north of town and hides in my basement computer room and writes books. And a few years ago, I began a story about a French king who married a Spanish princess, and it should have been, in the tabloids of the time, and it should have had a happy ever after ending, and it was a horror story. I knew that ahead of time. What I didn't know was that I couldn't write the story of these people without telling the story of the entire time. The 6th century, the 500 AD period, and it got out of hand, like all stories do. But that's what I'm going to do this morning, is tell you the story of the time, because if I have any success at all, you're going to leave here thinking that the most exciting time in the world, the most exciting place in the world was just exactly France in the 6th century. Of course, it wasn't called France at that time. The land still looked like it does now, but there was no United Kingdom across the English Channel there, and we certainly didn't have Belgium and the Netherlands and tiny little Luxembourg up to the northeast. Those things hadn't even been thought of yet. The idea of Germany, the Germans were just people. They weren't a country. They lived on the north side of the Rhine River, which isn't that main boundary of France. It is down toward the right-hand side, but then it angles on up toward the Netherlands. And over on the far right here, where you've got CH, those are the cantons of Helvetica. That's the right name for Switzerland. And forget it, Switzerland hadn't even been thought of yet. Those were just the mountains, land debatable. Down in the south, well, yes, we did have Hispania, or Hispania. That certainly existed. But France, forget it, the name hadn't even been used yet. This whole area was called Gaul. It had been Gaul for the better part of 500, 600 years. Ever since Julius Caesar went across the country with his troops, conquered it 100 years before Christ. And then the Romans moved in. They built cities, big cities, cities of tens of thousands of people. Cities surrounded by stone walls, serviced by massive aqueducts, 3-story high, beautifully tiered structures. They still exist. They're still standing over there. They connected their cities with stone-paved roads that were in use up to World War I. And the people who lived in these cities, they were Romans. Don't tell them otherwise. They were true, honest-to-goodness Romans. Of course, there were other people. First of all, you had the villas. Now, the villas were farms that were owned by senators from Rome. The senators never went to visit their farms, of course. They were just managed. They produced all the food that Gaul needed, all the food that wanted to be exported. Gaul was even starting to make wine. Can you imagine that? Wines that were as good as the Italian wines. If you asked the local people, the Italians wouldn't have agreed. But on the other hand, Italy didn't exist yet either. Italy was all Rome too, right? And then along with the villas, which of course became villages as time went on, there were the squatters. There were all these people who were trying to get into Gaul because Gaul was a beautiful place to live. And when you look at it, you realize what? Up in the north and all along the west, you've got ocean. People can't get in to bother you from the oceans. The Vikings hadn't come along yet. Okay. Down to the south, you've got the Pyrenees Mountains separating you from the Spanish peninsula. Yes, you can cross the mountains and get in, but that's a pain. It's not the sort of a thing you do just on a casual run-of-the-mill, I want to go out and rape and pillage somewhere. Most of the influx into Gaul was coming across the Rhine River up there from the northeast. And it was coming from people who were trying to get away from other people. This was the age that the Europeans, historians sometimes call the Volkswanderung, the movement of the folk. Everybody was moving. And the prime movers way back in the far east were the Huns. They were nomadic horsemen. They moved further and further west every year, and they returned less far east every year. And basically, everybody was trying to get away from them because they were rough riders. And Rome's response was, no, you can't come in. This is our land. They didn't have to worry too much because the Rhine River is wide and it's deep and it's cold. And most years it doesn't freeze over in the winter. So yes, if you really know what you're doing, you can swim your horses across it. But to take your wife and kids across the Rhine, take your families, people just piled up on the east banks of the Rhine River. Rome looked at them, ignored them, and one winter, the Rhine froze over, and all of a sudden, you had thousands of people. Well, geez, what are we going to do with all these war refugees, internally displaced people, economic migrants? Terms we've seen, heard recently, huh? Well, tell them to go back. Sir, they can't go back. Send some soldiers up there. It turns out, by the time you reach the 400 AD period, all of Rome's legions were stationed along the Rhine River or the Danube River, further down to the south, and running along the Black Sea, kind of. All the legions were there just to keep people from crossing. Rome didn't have enough soldiers to fight its own wars. I got a good idea. Let some of them across, and their men will have to become soldiers. And we'll ship them out to Persia to fight our Persian wars, and then we'll have enough soldiers to guide. By the time it was over, those soldiers were building cities along the Rhine just to act as guard posts. The city of Cologne, which had already been started, grew magnificently. Cologne, by the way, just stands for colony. It was a colony of soldiers. They actually had soldiers building fences along the upper regions of it. Can you imagine any country that would be so silly as to do a thing like that? Well, it didn't do much good. You've got Gaul sitting in here with all these beautiful cities. These are all Roman cities, all tacked along its waterways for the most part, and trying like heck to stay Roman. But over the course of 150 years or so, Rome couldn't cope with it. They just had to let the people settle. Basically, they were being beaten into submission by, people who they thought were dirt. Okay, that's my moral story for today. I think you got the message. Up there in the far northwest, well, not far, along the coast, let's say, you got the Saxons. Now, they had drifted down all the way from roughly Poland, Germany, Lithuania, following the Baltic, and then on the North Sea. And of course, a lot of the Saxons had already crossed the English Channel over to England. That was part of the Anglo-Saxon invasion, but a vast number of them lived right along the coast. And then below them you see those Alans. They settled just north of Orleans. They had come all the way from the Caucasus Mountains at the far eastern end of the Black Sea, just looking for a home. The Bretons in the peninsula that now is called Brittany, they actually came from England heading south. Turns out when the Saxons invaded England, they pushed a lot of people up toward what we call Wales, and finally those people drifted south by way of the ocean to settle back where the Saxons had been. Ain't history amazing? You got the Burgundians in the center. Now the Burgundians were the classic case of people who settled right on the Rhine River. And they crossed in one of those big freeze-ups. The original Burgundian city we now call Worms. It's on the Rhine in Germany. But in the year 430, Rome decided, okay, enough of this nonsense. We're going to show what we can really do. They burnt the place out. They either killed or displaced about 20,000 people in one summertime campaign that probably lasted no more than 3 or 4 days. They turned around and found out that the Burgundians ended up around Lyon, right in the middle of Gaul. I'm sorry, folks, you can do things like try and kick them out, you can do things like try and burn them out, but unless you actually kill every single one, and the Burgundians basically owned the middle of the country, and the big boys are down at the bottom, the Goths. The Visigoths in particular. Now, they started actually crossing the Danube River. They ended up going through what we would have called Yugoslavia today, except Yugoslavia no longer exists. They meandered on down, Rome kicking them out of every place they tried to settle, until they got down to Greece where they sacked Athens. Then they turned around, came all the way back up through Yugoslavia, around the north end of the Adriatic, got into Italy, came all the way down the Italian peninsula, sacked Rome. That was, I think, the year 436 or 426 or something like that. Went all the way down to the bottom of the peninsula, turned around, came back, sacked Rome a second time. Rome was in a shambles by this point. Crossed northern Italy, crossed the Alps, came down into Gaul, and kind of just kept being pushed by the Romans until finally the Romans gave up and said, okay, we'll stop bothering you if you will stop. And they gave them the area around Toulouse, down there at the bottom. So all of these people are sitting there. Oh yes, and the Franks. That's what we're supposed to talk about today, isn't it? The Franks. They're up there in the Rhine Valley. They had originally been there ever since the 300s, but they were on the east side, northeast side of the Rhine. They would, cross after their plants were in the ground in the spring, do a little bit of raping and pillaging, and cross back in the fall. They showed an inclination to want to settle. Rome constantly tried to kick them out. All of the early 400s, Rome is up there trying to push them out and trying to push the Visigoths out. And then in the year 450, it all changes. Attila the Hun actually crosses the Rhine with all of his riders. He crosses, about by that area where there's this knuckle in the border there, a little bit north of Strasbourg, goes up to Koblenz, turns left, comes upstream along the Moselle River, aiming right into the heart of Gaul, and Rome doesn't have enough soldiers to do anything about it. The Roman general, his name is Flavius Aetius, he starts shoveling troops into Gaul as fast as he can, and scurries around the country trying to cobble up an alliance of all these people that have been fighting against Rome for the last 100+ years. And he does, because they don't like Rome. But these people hate the Huns. It was the Huns that got them moving in the first place. They get together just north of the city of Orleans, which is just about under the S in Elans up there. And this unlikely alliance turns Attila the Hun back. Attila the Hun has never been beaten before in his life. And they push him back, heading eastward until they reach the city called Troyes, which we Americans, looking at the way it's spelled, would say that must be Troyes. And that's on one of the upper branches of the Seine River. And there is a bloody battle there. And they beat Attila the Hun. And he keeps moving east. And he leaves Gaul and never comes back. And in the aftermath of the battle, Flavius Aetius, the Roman general, who has managed to do this, talks with all of his, allies, and with the Franks in particular. He says, "You people have shown yourself to be loyal allies and very good fighters. And it would be all right with us Romans if you were to claim that land up in the northeast corner that you always come over and want to settle in. That would be fine with us. We'll cede it to you. You can live there." And so we now have the Franks as officially living in Gaul. The name of the king was Meroving. He was a young man at the time. From his descendants, we get the Merovingian dynasties of France. Usually you reach the Merovingian dynasties of France and you skip forward 2 paragraphs to Charlemagne. Today we're going to stay with the Merovingians. You can always tell a Frank king and a Frank tribal group because their kings, their rulers, wore their hair very long. And they kept their hair very well groomed, and they were good-looking people. This from Roman writers. So if a Roman thinks somebody's good-looking, he's got to be passable. And what's more, you aren't allowed to be a king unless you have long hair, and you can't have long hair unless you are a king. Those are the primary rules of the Merovingians. We start with those rules. That's 450 AD. We've just beaten Attila the Hun. 2 years later, Attila dies in his sleep. Everybody's happy. The Romans all celebrate. The Roman Emperor Valentinianus stabs Flavius Aetius in the back just to show how happy he is. He doesn't need a general anymore. Aetius' soldiers, they take umbrage at this. They assassinate the Roman Emperor. In the chaos that follows, a tribe called the Vandals crosses from northern Africa into Sicily, into southern Italy, comes up the Italian peninsula, and as they're pounding on the south gates of Rome, off the north gates, the emperor is trying to flee, and his citizens stone him to death, and Rome is toast. Rome's out. Rome never comes back. Gaul is left on its own. Degenerates into a series of petty warlords fighting against each other, usually, based on ethnic backgrounds. Comes the year 490 AD, a warlord for the Franks named Clovis is having remarkably good success. He takes his men up and down the Rhine River, reminding people that this used to be Frankish territory, and just because they moved west, doesn't mean that they don't claim it yet. They fight a big battle against the Germanic tribe called the Altmans, just out of Cologne. They beat them, send them packing across the Rhine River. Then he takes his troops along the English Channel fighting against the Saxons. Those that aren't dispersed east are forced back over the Channel into England. That's sort of like the last wave of the Saxon invasion of England. Clovis comes down the Atlantic coast, fights against the Visigoths, who are coming up from Toulouse. That's just out of the town of Poitiers. And he beats them, he kills Alaric, the king of the Visigoths. So Clovis pretty much owns this huge horseshoe of land, which is starting to be called the land of the Franks. And the only people he hasn't been fighting against are the Burgundians. And that's because his wife, Clotilde, is a Burgundian princess. And that marriage was arranged just to keep them from fighting. When Clovis has done all this, while he's doing all this, Clotilde convinces him to become a Christian. So Clovis gets himself baptized in the city of Reims, up kind of at the top center of that horseshoe arc, becomes a Christian, and at that point acquires a huge fistful of bishops and deacons and clerics of all kinds. Because Gaul has been Christian for about 250 years by now. And these churchmen, with nothing better to do, set about making the Frankish society a literate society. Not that any Franks can read or write. They certainly can't read or write Latin. But everything is starting to be recorded now. Births, baptisms, marriages, deaths, who owns what property, who has sworn fealty to who. Everything's in writing. By the year 500, the law code of the Franks has actually been put into writing. The church lifted it from the tribe of Franks that are called the Salian Franks, and it became known as the Salic Law Code. That law code held for better than 1,500 years, up into the 20th century, different parts of it, mostly in Central Europe. Because it is written down, we can understand what happens when Clovis dies. When a Frankish man dies, his estate does not go to his eldest son. That's primogeniture. That's Roman style. That's, a lot of customs. Oldest boy gets everything. Nope. With the Franks, the properties are distributed among all the male offspring of the man, as long as that offspring, that boy, is of age. Now, a Frankish boy becomes a man at age 13, at which point, of course, a boy can do the only thing a man has to do in life. And in the case of Clovis, you had 4 sons. So all of a sudden, the land of the Franks, the kingdom of the Franks, becomes 4 separate kingdoms with different names. That's where you usually turn the page of your history book over to, Charlemagne and say, forget this nonsense. Clovis's oldest son, Theodoric, takes about half of his father's real estate up there in gold, calls his land Austrasia, which kind of means southeastern kingdom. That is where Austria, the country today, originally gets its name from. He rules it from Metz, or Metz at the time it was called. That's on the river that leads up to Koblenz, the Moselle. So he can get down into the Rhine Valley very quickly when he needs to. Second oldest, his name is Childebert. He parks in Paris, calls his land Neustria, the New Kingdom. Third oldest is Clodomir. He decides to live in Orleans. He doesn't have much imagination, calls his kingdom the Kingdom of Orleans. They give the youngest son, Clothar, the old mud flats up there in the far corner, the blue, rules it from Soissons, calls it the Kingdom of Soissons, and because it's, damp and drab and a dreary place, they say you can have all this land to the southwest as well, where we just finished pummeling the Visigoths and destroying the land, and it's worthless right now. Maybe you can do something out of it. If this was a normal Frankish family, these 4 boys would now start fighting with each other to see who could take what from whom. That's standard operating procedure. But this is a family with a 5th actor, Queen Mother Clotilde. And she is a strong, domineering woman, and she says, look, boys, you should be aware that my father, the king of the Burgundians, has just been assassinated by the guy who now is king. And officially, we therefore do not like Burgundians. You have a common enemy on the southern borders of all your lands. Don't fight amongst yourself. Go down and take land from the Burgundians. And the boys do that. They ally with each other, and they go to war down in Burgundian territory, taking one city at a time. Some years are better than other years. About 4 years after this has started, in the city of Bezerance, which is up in the French Alps, kind of, the Burgundians lay a real whipping on the Franks. They kill King Clodomir. They wipe out the soldiery of Orleans. And that changes everything, because Clodomir only has 3 infant sons. They aren't going to be of age to inherit their dad's property for a long time. The other Franks immediately pack up their campaigns and head north to Orleans. Clothar gets there first. Clothar is able to tell the people of Orleans, I'm sorry, but your king is dead. And all of your soldiers are dead. And I am here with all of my soldiers. It is Clothar who is able to tell the grieving widow, Queen Gunthic, that if she has any hope of ever seeing her children live to get their inheritance, she had better remarry very quickly a very strong man. So when the next 2 brothers arrive at Orleans, they find Clothar and all of his army are inside the gates are closed, and Gunthic is Clothar's newest wife, his 4th wife, all 4 at the same time. This is how Clothar acquires things. The boys don't like this very much. They promptly lay a siege around Orleans. Turns out, though, that after just a month or so, all the cows and pigs that were left outside the gates have been eaten up. And all the people inside the city are getting hungry, so they negotiate. And the deal they strike is, all right, Clothar, you're in there, we know you got it, you're going to bleed the place dry, but you're the regent of Orleans until those boys come of age. But remember, when they turn 13, they acquire their father's inheritance. And to make sure they're going to turn 13, we're going to take the boys out from Orleans and they're going to live with their grandmother Clotilde in Paris. So it's done, bang, like that. And over winter, the boys patch up their hard feelings and go back to fighting against the Burgundians, and they make pretty good progress down there. But time goes on, and Clothar is starting to realize that owning Orleans is not really all it's cracked up to be. First of all, he's got the Bretons living off there to the far left there, the far west, and every campaigning season they come in and try and damage his property. But he can't take troops out of Orleans to fight against them, because if he takes his troops out of Orleans, he finds the gates closed when he comes back. People don't like him very well there. And he can't take his men out of Soissons to go down to Orleans, because his brothers would attack Soissons and take that from him. And what's more, they'd never let him cross their land with his army. I mean, use common sense. And these boys are getting older. The oldest is now pushing 11 years old. He's got to do something. Pays a visit to his brother Childebert in Paris. And he says, Childebert, we got this problem. And Childebert says, what do you mean, we? One point I should make real quick before we pursue. Up there in Austrasia, King Theuderic, the eldest of those brothers, he's now died. He's died of war wounds. But his son Theudebert has taken over and is a competent ruler and is king of Austrasia. The important thing is, Theudebert has no claim on anything other than his father's lands. So between Childebert and Clothar, they have the kingdoms of Soissons, Neustria, and Orleans. Theudebert's out of the picture. And Clothar says, don't give me a hard time, brother, because I got this idea. If we can persuade these 3 kids to renounce their inheritance, then the kingdom of Orleans is yours and mine, and I will give it to you. You can have the kingdom of Orleans. All I want is a land path so I can take my men from Soissons down to the southwest around Toulouse and try and make something out of those lands down there. Now Childebert gets interested. He said, well, yeah, it sounds like a good idea. How are you going to persuade these kids to renounce their inheritance? Clothar says, I got this idea. So a couple days later, Queen Mother Clotilde, who still lives in Paris, who still has the children there, she receives a messenger. And the messenger in his one hand has a scissors. The other hand, the messenger has a short sword. The messenger bows in front of the queen and says, Your Majesty, your sons advise you that your grandchildren can either be shorn of their hair, tonsured, and sent to live in a monastery, or they can be slain. Choose the scissors or the sword. Nobody knows what Queen Mother Clotilde thought about that. We do know what she said. She looks down her royal nose at this worm in front of her and says, far better it be for the children to be slain if they are not to be raised to the kingship. Oh. The messenger goes back and tells Clothar. Clothar's sitting there in the audience chamber with his brother Childebert. Clothar says, bring the boys in. Now each of these kids has his own bevy of attendants. These are royal princelings. The attendants for the oldest boy, his name is Theuderic. He was named after his now dead uncle. He's pushing 11 years old. Bring the boy into the audience chamber, stabs him with a sword and kills him right there. The attendants for the second boy, he's 8 years old. His name is Gunther. They bring him into the chamber, and Gunther sees his brother lying dead on the floor in a pool of blood. Gunther understands what's happened. He realizes what's about to happen. He starts to plead with his uncles, for God's sakes, I'm your nephew. Have mercy on me. I'm a kid. It's Childebert's turn to do the dirt. Childebert can't do it. He says, I didn't think we would have to. And Clothar explodes. You son of a bitch! It was your idea in the first place. You swore an oath that we would carry through on this. You're going to go to hell for swearing an oath and breaking it. I'm going to take my troops, and everybody in the palace is looking around. What's going on here? What's going to happen? And Childebert buckles. He turns to one of his servants and says, kill the boy. And the servant strangles Gunther. And when the child is dead, Clothar stabs him in the side just to make sure. The attendants for the third child, who's 5 years old, his name is Clodewald. They get him the hell out of the palace and out of Paris. And they hide him in a monastery about 2-3 miles down the road, and nobody knows where the kid is for a couple of weeks. When Clothar finds out, the boy's hair has been tonsured. He has been entered into holy orders at 5 years old. He will be a monk or a priest for the rest of his life. That's what Clothar wanted in the first place, so he leaves the kid alone. I will pause this history lesson to make a couple of points. Point number one. Welcome to the Merovingians. They are all like this. There are no nice Merovingians. Just keep that in mind. Point two, that young boy, Clothar. Not Clothar. Clothar's the dirty old man. Clodewald. Clodewald stays in the monastery. He gets, older and older. 8 years later, Clodewald is 13. People start knocking at the door. They address him as Your Majesty. They bow in front of him. They say, let your hair grow long, and then come out of this monastery and claim your rights. You are the rightful king of Orleans. We will swear fealty to you. We will be your loyal subjects. This happens a couple of times. Finally, Clodewald, from the steps of the monastery, says, no. I took an oath to be a man of God. I've been a man of God more than half my life now. I will be a man of God, I will not be a king. I forgive my uncles for having killed my brothers. I pray for them every day. Turns, goes back in the monastery, end of interview. We'll keep on the story of Clodagh for just a little bit because he stays there about 15, 16, 17 years later. He dies in his sleep one night, natural death. The church makes haste to declare Clodagh the saint. And he was. He was a good, holy, saintly man. He's buried at the monastery. People start showing up to pray at the tomb of St. Clodagh. They don't have many Merovingian saints to pray to. Time goes on. The monastery actually becomes known as the Monastery of St. Clodagh. It develops into a small village, a suburb of Paris, the village of St. Clodagh, eventually the city of St. Clodagh. The French language changes. Clodagh is pronounced as Cloud. That is the city of St. Cloud. After which that town 15 miles down the road has been named. Because the French were here on the Mississippi River long, long before the Norwegians and the Germans and the Scandinavians ever showed up, right? That's us. That's why everybody in Stearns County should know their Merovingian history. And now back to the history lesson. You've seen how Clothair operates. Clothair makes darn sure that every time somebody in the family passes away, he is present at the funeral to do whatever is needed to make sure that the inheritance flows to him. And after a short amount of time, Clothair is the only one left, and he owns the whole thing. Lock, stock, and barrel. It's all his, and it is much bigger than Gaul ever was in the day of the Romans. Much, much bigger. So Clothair is happy as a clam at high tide. He goes out hunting one November, works up a good sweat, comes home, catches a cold, it settles in his chest. And as he's laying on his sickbed, he rails, "What kind of a God is this Christian God who would fell a famous king like myself with nothing but a head cold?" And Clothair dies of pneumonia. Pity. Clothair had 4 sons. Guess what? Yep. Back to 4 kingdoms again. The oldest boy, his name is Cheribert, and he picks up Paris and he says, "I'm going to live there." The boundaries, have changed a little bit over the course of time. Second oldest is Guntram. He parks in Orleans, and now the kingdom of Orleans extends way down into all that Burgundian territory. The third oldest is Sigibert. He's up in Austrasia. But notice that he has this claim down here in the south around Clermont and Ferrand. And that's because back when this land was being conquered from the Burgundians, Theuderic of Austrasia was the guy who took Clermont. So that's his. So now that becomes part of that. A lot of these cities are all divided into 2 or 3 chunks, depending on which kings were present when the city surrendered to the Franks. Finally, you got the youngest kid, Chilperic. They put him up in the mud flats, way up there in Soissons in the northeast corner, rather. No, it is northwest. And they say, yeah, just like a generation ago, you can have this land down in the far southwest around Toulouse. That land would have been the 5th brother. His name was Schramm. He got antsy and rebelled against his father and got killed a couple of years before old Clothair died. These kids are more chips of the old block than anybody would have ever realized until they see what they do in life, and they don't have a common mother to keep them in line. By the time he died, Clothair was on wife 6, and all 6 were still alive. Up there in Paris, Cheribert, alcoholic, a madman. When he's drunk, he rages. He's killed his first 2 wives with his own hands in the palace. He's killed a couple of other people in the palace. When he's drunk and rages, the church excommunicated him. His nickname is the Mad Impregnator. But despite all of the bastard children that are running around Gaul, he has never recognized any of his male offspring. So Cheribert doesn't have an heir. And then in Orleans, you've got Guntram. His first wife was a pickup job. He got her pregnant, he married her. She delivered a son, which was nice, but he had come to his senses and realized he needed social connections, he needed money. So he divorced that wife and married another. And that girl dropped him a son, which was nice. So now he's got two boys, but the woman, she's really uptight about the fact that this other son, this older son, is there, so she poisons that boy. She was a Merovingian. And then her own kid dies of dysentery. Well, that so turns off Guntram that he divorces her and marries a third wife. Maybe he's settling down. They've got two kids of their own now. The youngest, Chilperic, who lives up there in Soissons, he was the one who married first. He got married at age 13. You can guess why. And he and his wife, for 10 years now, they've got 5 kids. The first 3 were boys. Chilperic was proud as a peacock. But the next 2 have been girls. And that last one, she was just born a couple months ago. And that kind of has soured Chilperic on this whole business. You know, if I can't get a son every time, why do I even try? So he divorces his wife for 10 years, packs her off at the mouth of the Seine River where it dumps into the English Channel in the town of Rouen. The city is not noted up there on that map, I apologize. Up in Metz in Austrasia, you've got Sigebert. Sigebert doesn't have any wife. Sigebert doesn't have any mistresses. Sigebert doesn't have any bastard children running around. His brothers kind of think Sigebert is a little bit effete. But every time they try and take something from him, like campaigns to take Rheims or fights to get Clermont, Sigebert comes out with his troops and he doesn't win every battle, but he holds his own. And Sigebert, in fact, spends most of his time on horseback down in the Rhine Valley convincing the Thuringians and the Swabians that what they really are allies of Austrasia, not subjects. And Sigebert is building up a cavalry of 6,000 Swabian horsemen that his brothers aren't aware of yet. And then Sigebert turns up with a wife. He sends his ambassadors down to the kingdom of the Goths in Spain, in Hispania, and they come back with the youngest daughter of the king of the Visigoths. That's King Athanagild. His youngest daughter's name is Brunhild. And she is not just young, she is good looking. And she is smart. And she shows very quickly that she can rule the kingdom while he is on horseback out in the field. And what's more, she gets pregnant right away. And oh my God, that means Sigebert has a marriage alliance with the Visigoths. And the Visigoths still hold all that land along the southern coast, the Mediterranean coast. They're parked in there pretty tight, and Toulouse used to be their place. And Sigebert needs help holding on to Clermont. Guess where he's going to get it from? Well, up there in Soissons, Brother Chilperic scrambles. He sends his ambassadors to the Visigoths, and they come back with the eldest daughter of the king of the Visigoths. Her name is Galswintha. And he makes her his new queen, kind of puts his favorite mistress, Fredegund, off to the side, and that'll show you, Sigebert. Now I have a marriage alliance of my own. Right about then begins one of the most interesting years in Frankish history. And you've thought that up to now, this was dull. New Year's Day feast, King Charibert drinks himself to death. And Charibert has no heirs. And it might be the middle of winter, but all 3 brothers get as many troops as they can and make a beeline for Paris. Guntram from Orleans gets there first, not with an army, but he gets there first with his own personal bodyguard, has an audience with the grieving queen, points out to her that if she really wants to preserve the style of life to which she is accustomed, she should get all the treasures that she can from her own wealth and her dead husband, get them into ox carts, trundle them across the bridges into Orleans for safekeeping. And she should go to Orleans herself, where she will be treated with much greater honor than her dead husband ever showed her. and the dumb cluck falls for a hook, line, and sinker. And right about this time, the people in Paris realize what's about to happen. They do what Parisians do best. They take up the planks from the bridges so now nobody can get over the Seine River to their island city. Paris has never been sacked, has never been invaded. Paris did the same stunt when the Huns were coming across 100 years before. Yeah, you can't get in, you can't hurt us. They send a messenger out to the king saying, look, we will be happy to be whoever subject you tell us is our master. But until you decide, nobody's coming in. So now you got these three kings on the outer banks of the Seine River, and they're all mad at each other, some more, some less, and they're all mad at Paris, but it's winter. They got to do something. They negotiate. Okay, tell you what, they swear oaths that they, as kings, will make no claim on Paris. Paris will be an open city. Paris will have to submit taxes to them by carrying the taxes across the river, but they individually will never enter Paris without telling their brothers they're coming. They will never enter Paris with troops. And this sets a precedent that Paris is going to remember for the rest of its life. And it's very seldom honored, but it has been decreed that Paris is a special city. And we all know that, don't we? It stayed that way forever and ever since that time. Then they get down to the issue of who's going to own what property, because Paris might sit there, but now we got to divide up all that green space into the kingdoms of Austrasia and into the kingdoms of Soissons, and 2-to-1, Chilperic and Sigebert, for the only time in their lives ever agreeing on something, agree that Guntram isn't going to get any property, he's got all the wealth. And they know darn well they're never going to get the wealth out of Orleans. So Guntram shrugs his shoulders and said, yeah, I got enough property, I don't need any more. And by the time it's done, Guntram rules that big yellow blob. The real estate winner is Chilperic, who has all that land in blue, a complete path from north to south. Austrasia with Sigebert, he not only holds his own, but he has picked up land around Tours and Poitiers, which is very rich cities. If he can only figure out how to hold on to them, because his brothers are going to be picking on those lands, and, they're far away from his own kingdom. But I told you this was just the start of the year. The next thing that happens is King Athanagild of the Visigoths dies in his sleep. No foul play, but now Brunhild and Galswintha don't have a father who is a king anymore. And the new king of the Visigoths ends up not being related to them at all. So those marriage alliances, they aren't worth anything. It doesn't bother Sigebert and Brunhild. They make a good couple. They make a good royal couple. Sigebert is on horseback down in the Rhine Valley, keeping his people happy, keeping his allies ready to roll. And Brunhild is starting to build churches. She is starting to build paved roads. The Franks are finally starting to not just squat down in old Roman ruins. They are starting to make the land their own. Well, that's Brunhild and Sigebert. Unfortunately, in Soissons, one morning, Queen Galswintha is found dead in her bedroom with the mark of a cord around her neck. And her husband, the king, he had spent the night before down in the basement with all of his army buddies drinking all night long. They swear he never left the drinking party. So nobody knows who could have killed the queen. And Chilperic grieves for his dead queen and buries her. And 7 days later marries Fredegund, his favorite mistress, and makes her the new queen. They don't send out condolence messages. So it's about 3 months later that Brunhild learns what happened to her sister. And she is livid. She swears vengeance against Fredegund, against Chilperic, against all their issue from this generation onward. She doesn't have to persuade her husband to go out and fight against Chilperic. Every campaigning season, Chilperic comes out from Soissons, marches past Paris, heading right to Tours and Poitiers, trying to take them. Every campaigning season, Sigebert meets him and beats him. One year he allies himself with Guntram. One year the 6,000 Swabian horsemen show up. He could have killed his brother a couple times. All he does is kind of chase Chilperic back into Soissons and make a fool of him. And this is starting to irritate Brunhild. She really wants to put an end to this nonsense. She starts lobbying his counts and dukes, her husband's counts and dukes. Let's fight for real one of these times, huh? It's not just Brunhild who's upset. The people of Paris send a delegation over to Sigebert and say, look, every time your brother comes down after you, he ravages all the lands on the outer banks of the Seine River. And those are the places where we built our hotels, our bars, our taverns, our whorehouses, all the things that give us some money. And what he doesn't ruin, your men ruin when they come after him. What we would like is the next time you march out after your brother, look over your shoulder and realize the gates of Paris are open to you. If you come into Paris, if you promise to rule from Paris, we will be your loyal subjects. That's an offer that's hard to refuse, even though Sigebert swore that he would never do something like that, right? So the next spring, Sigebert front loads troops into Tours and Poitiers, so he's got enough men down there they can actually come out of the city to meet an advancing army. They don't have to wait on the walls. He brings his Swabian horsemen, 6,000 strong, into the Moselle River Valley and parks them at the town or a fort called Trier. It's just a little bit downstream of Metz, just having them waiting. Sure enough, Chilperic comes out of Soissons, begins to march to Tours. Sigebert takes his infantry out of Metz and follows him. Behind that infantry come the 6,000 Swabian horsemen. But when Sigebert gets down around Paris, he turns and enters Paris, takes the city. And the Swabian horsemen charge into the back of Chilperic's army just as the troops from Tours and Poitiers are meeting it at the front. They make a bloody sandwich out of the people from Soissons. They kill the eldest son of Chilperic. Chilperic has to flee the field. He does get back to Soissons. He evacuates it, gets Fredegund and his other kids out of there and all of his treasure. Takes them up a little bit northeast to the city of Tournai, which isn't a city, it's just a castle that's easier to defend, and he hopes everybody will not notice that he's there. But the 6,000 Swabian horsemen turn around and invest the thing and just park there waiting for Sigebert to take oaths of fealty from Paris and then come out with his infantry and siege equipment and put an end to this whole thing. And up in Tournai, Fredegund is realizing what an absolute loser her husband is. He might be a king, but that's all he's got going for him. He's a lousy field general, and when the pressure is on, he's a dithering idiot. She takes matters in her own hands and dispatches a couple of assassins with long poisoned knives. Sigebert leaves Paris and is knifed down and killed. And the wheel of fortune turns once again. Well, Sigebert's loyal retainers, dukes and counts, they get his 5-year-old kid, his young son, out of Paris, back into Metz for safekeeping, and they will crown him the new king of Austrasia. Of course, at 5 years old, he's going to have a regency council ruling him for the next 8 years. And those loyal counts and dukes leave Brunhild in Paris. The last thing you want if you are regents over a baby king is to have his mother around, because that's what the kid will always listen to, right? So there's Brunhild stuck in Paris with her daughters. The people from Tours and Poitiers, they fall back into their cities and close the gates behind them and wait to see what's going to happen. The 6,000 Swabian horsemen, they were personally loyal to Sigebert. They don't know this 5-year-old kid from nobody. They pack up and go home, pillaging as they go. Chilperic comes storming out of Tournai back to Soissons, heading south, gathering his old forces around him, eventually rides into Paris, knowing that he's got Brunhild there for the taking, and is met by an old man laying on his crozier, the Bishop of Paris, who's standing in the middle of the road saying, "I thought you said you would never bring troops into the city. Your brother did that, and look what's happened to him." And if Chilperic is anything, he is a deathly coward, and that stops him. And he mumbles and weasel words and claims that these soldiers are just his personal guard, they aren't his army, and by the time it's done, the Bishop of Paris has wrested an oath from him that he will not only not harm Brunhild, certainly not kill Brunhild or her daughters, but he will protect Brunhild. And then the bishop lets him go his way. That bishop's name, by the way, was Germain. The church made a saint out of him. That is Saint Germain. Yes, yes indeed, I told you there were ties between him and us. Saint Germain Street in St. Cloud both of them came from this same time frame. Well, now Chilperic has his hands on Brunhild, but what's he going to do with her? He can't take her back to Soissons. I mean, Fredegund would have her dead meat right away. In fact, he's not so sure what Fredegund's going to do to him when he gets back there, once he learns that, he's had Brunhild but let her go. He packs Brunhild off to that same convent at the mouth of the same river where his divorced wife was sent 9 years ago. Then he tells his two sons, gives them troops and says, "Go down, capture Tours and Poitiers. Take them now. They're ours. Sigebert's out of here. I'm going back to Soissons for a little bit of R&R." Anybody recognize R&R from military? Rest and relaxation. Chilperic was good at that. From the point of view of our history, it is right here that his two boys learn where their mother went 9 years ago. They knew their mother had been divorced. They knew she had been sent away. These kids who were less than 9 years old at the time never knew where. Now they do. As the boys are riding south toward Tours, the oldest of the boys, his name is Merovich, says to hell with this nonsense, turns command over to his second lieutenant, and rides off to visit Mommy in Rouen. He gets up to Rouen, asks to see the Lady Audovera, has a reunion with his mother, and is seduced by Brunhild. And within a week, marries her. Brunhild is 33, Merovich is 18. Brunhild has begun her revenge. Well, yes, our time is about up. Brunhild's time, however, is really only beginning. She is 33 years old. She is going to be around till age 70. She is going to be the regent, queen mother over her son, over her 2 grandchildren, and over her great-grandchildren. And by the time that she dies at age 70, and it is not a pleasant, peaceful death, she will be the most hated woman in Gaul. Because from this point on, Brunhild is not going to play nice. You, on the other hand, have been a very nice audience. You have gasped at the right places. You have laughed at the right places. And I can only say thank you very much for that. Me being a callous author, not only did I bring this book along that I have written about these times, and it's available for you up there for sale. It's called Nor Hell Fury. That's after that old line from a play around the 1600s. Nature hath no rage as love to hatred turned, nor hell of fury as that of woman scorned. And Brunhild's going to show it, as will Fredegund. There's going to be lots of blood and gore in that story. But It's there. It's available to you at half price. You can also find it at full price on Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com if you want. And I brought all my other books along too because I'm shameless. So they're all up there available for sale. And thank you once again very much.